Money, the prey for the modern hunter-gatherer. Nowadays, it looks something like this, or like this. But it didn't always look like this. If we go back in time, there comes a point where we don't know much about people. But we know that they were producing stuff and bookkeeping their transactions using tools. This is one of them, bulla. People in Mesopotamia used it. They wrapped small tokens representing the items they exchanged into sealed clay envelopes. People used it for thousands of years, and over time, they fine-tuned it with better seals and better tokens. Eventually, around 3000 BCE, they also started to use clay tablets with cuneiform writings. Luckily, cuneiform writing is decoded, so from this time onwards, we have somewhat better insights about money's journey. Now, when we read the tablets from this period, we learn that people were using all kinds of commodities and rare objects as money. Take, for example, the oldest known payslip. It's 5,000 years old and it's been paid in beers. Or look at some of the oldest known law codes or commercial tablets. They state the usage of many different goods as money, like barley, cattle, butter, salt, silver, gold, and other precious metals. From these codes, we also learn that there were many different systems in place regarding money and trade, like bartering, gifts, loans, interests, and leasing. Sooner or later though, all historical civilizations starts to use rare metals as money. Metals were much more durable and easier to use compared to other commodities like grains, so it's no surprise that people prefer them. But they were still not perfect because they needed to be weighted and verified each time during transactions. Then, around 640 BCE, Lydians made one of the oldest known standardized metal money, the coin. Coins were perfect. They had standard units. They were made by a trusted authority, the king. It was much easier to use them. Similarly, in other parts of the world, different metal coins started to emerge. And in time, they became the main medium of exchange all around the world. They even managed to survive to this day, and gold and silver coins became the most common form of money throughout the history. Many years later, around 11th century, merchants in China didn't want to carry heavy bulk of metal coins anymore, especially for large transactions. This led to the invention of the first form of paper money. Basically, merchants were depositing their money to a trusted person in exchange for a stamped paper as a proof of their money. So, paper was representing the coins they owned. Around the same time, people in Europe were using something totally different. They were using marked wooden sticks called tally stick. It was a simple tool to record debts and payments between two traders. Two halves of the stick would only match to each other, so could not be modified without the other half. During 12th century England, tally sticks were used to track tax payment. But when king wanted to collect his money before it is due, he started to sell his part of the sticks to other people in exchange for early coins. As a result, tally sticks circulated as a form of money. Eventually though, paper money started to be used in Europe as well, and by the 14th century, it was being used in every part of it. Early paper money was more of a document. Only the owner of the paper would be able to use it because there was a name field on it. But in time, name of the owner is removed from the papers, so they became more usable in daily trade. Trusted third parties, in other words banks, were issuing these papers and they were called banknotes. So in those times there were many different types of banknotes even within the same country. Ultimately though, governments established their own banks and centralized the issuing of the money and their designs. Original paper monies were representing real coins, made of precious metals, deposited to banks. So there was a direct relationship between actual valuable objects and papers. But in time, this link is removed and eventually replaced with the authority of the government. And papers essentially became the representation of imaginary but agreed upon values. Then the computers arrived. And it became even more easier to store imaginary values. We started leaving papers more and more in favor of digits on computer screens. Nowadays, less than 10% of the world's money exists physically. Everything else is represented digitally. For centuries, we relied on these systems where third parties, mainly governments and banks, provided means for the commerce. Today, however, we are witnessing another change to the shape of money. with cryptocurrencies. These new currencies removes all the third parties and replaces them with computers. And instead of government-issued money, we can now use computer-issued monies. Today, hundreds of cryptocurrencies are being used along with other currencies. When we look back at the shapes money has taken, it's fair to say it's quite a shapeshifter. Although I mentioned some common forms money has taken, this is by no means an exclusive list. It is impossible to identify all the objects that has been used or being used as money because it's essentially a method we use to store values and it can really take any shape as long as the traders agree upon that new shape. Today, we all agree that piece of colorful paper is worth something. In fact, it's one of the very few things humans all around the world agree, so in that sense, it is very unique.